It's the Terry Less Jim Show from Bob Cajun, podcasting ideas for you, coming from two retired guys with too much coffee and what? Ideas aplenty? Jim, hope your travels are going well and you're safe. And this is an idea about ideas. The history of cultural, should I say appropriation, or when cultural symbols become wrapped up in hate. The idea that has been rolling around in the wheels, the gerbil cage of my mind. Gee, I wonder if that was what Gordon Lightfoot had in mind when he penned, "If you could read my mind, love. If you could read my mind, what a world my thoughts would tell. What a tale my thoughts could tell. What a tale. Tale of two cities, two different points of view, and that's usually where the sparks start flying. Sparks or hammers breaking glass. The sound of breaking glass, usually associated with fire alarms. How about breaking into a dean's office or a university office building? How about the question of when social protests go too far? Is there a limit to what a society, a free, democratic society in the West would tolerate? Are there limits to freedom of expression and freedom to speak? Are there limits? Well, I think with everything there's a limit. I mean, the whole idea of limits comes right from the idea of the golden mean. Aristotle's golden mean, that there is a middle way. And that when you swing the pendulum to one side too far, the middle way is a reaction to that swing and goes the other way until you find balance. Or is it the idea of a thesis and antithesis? A thesis being an idea, antithesis being the opposite idea. And when you put those two together, you get a new paradigm, a new resulting way of understanding things. So is that what we're experiencing now on the campuses of Canadian, Western, United States colleges and universities? I'm thinking specifically of Columbia, since that protest involves a tent city of students, all with keffiyehs and all shouting with microphones, megaphones, messages that are not what you would normally have. You can have protests. You can maybe become loud and boisterous using amplification to get your leader's voice. You may get chants from the people to rile up the crowd. But what is the end game? What is the end game of social protest, especially here in the West? When the shouts are, quote, "from the river to the sea," I'm not sure whether we have room for negotiation. From the river to the sea, we've covered that before, the Jim and Terry Show. Two retired guys with coffees talking about world ideas, things we read about, things we follow. Sources in the legacy media, since we're two older guys, we tend to still follow network news more than social media posts and blogs. We get our information from usually what I would call respected sources, meaning the reporters have to be vetted, their stories have to be vetted, their interviews with people, sources have to be known. You can keep a source from public disclosure, but you need to know and document where you're getting your information from, as opposed to Facebook groups and people who associate with other people who click, like, share stuff without really checking into the sources. For most of the stuff that I follow on Twitter, and I follow the liberals, the conservatives, and the New Democratic Party, the Greens, and I try to get an idea of where stuff is coming from by listening to spokespeople from each of the center left, center right, far left, and try to assess where information is coming from, what people believe to be true, and why they believe it. And I'm a little bothered by stuff that seems to be getting co-opted. Do you know the word co-opt? Not co-op as in you get a work session in your high school shop class, you get to go and work in an automotive company or one of those placements that you do at college where you get a work term, not co-op, but co-opted, as in taken over, to be used for some purpose other than for which it was intended. In this case, universities being co-opted by radicals. Would I use the word radical to describe a student protest? Well, it seemed radical in the 60s and 70s, the anti-Vietnam War protests, but putting a flower in the barrel of a rifle held by a U.S. National Guards person on the campus of Ohio State is different than yelling hate-filled slogans at a university campus. And I think that needs to be set out, that there is some comparison, but there is a demarcation, a separation of what these things were all about. One is about peace. One is about fomenting violence, stirring the pot. And I have to wonder about the numbers, and I have no way of assessing this, so I just ask the questions. There is a danger in just asking questions because even the way we frame questions sometimes betrays a bias or something insincere or an answer that's already been concluded in one's mind, and so you ask a question expecting a certain answer. I would rather have an open-ended approach and use the historian's toolkit to say, to what extent are these campus protests in the Western democracies? Are they legitimate social discourse, or are they, as the trucker convoy to Ottawa, maybe had some degree of legitimacy in its complaints early on, but it quickly became co-opted, as my good friend Jim would be saying if he was sitting here in the Hobbit hole with me. He could see the process of it devolving. Devolving is the opposite of evolving. It's going to pieces. It's going to fall apart, break apart. Too many disparate interests, including professional agitators, including people who just want to sow seeds of dissent and violence. And that includes all forms of protest that are so easily vulnerable to being taken over. It doesn't bother me that you have freedom of speech and freedom of expression. What bothers me is when public health and safety become jeopardized, compromised, or in other ways at risk during what some people call social protest. So I'm interested in the parameters. I'm interested in poking around the outside to find the boundaries of what I might call an infection of ideas. And when I use infection, I do use that body reference because infections have a source, a site that is the origin, and they spread. And the question for me is always, how was the infection introduced into the body being Western democracies? To what extent has the infection spread? That means how widely espoused, believed are these ideas, and who is taken over and succumbs to these ideas, believing that they alone are right. So I'm interested in the whole process of the way these things go about, how they spread. And I am concerned, I think I began about social symbols and being co-opted, being taken over. We called it a cultural appropriation when some person from another culture takes the dress, the hairstyle, the whatever, and use it for their own purposes, though they are not part of that culture. And I'm wondering to what extent the keffiyeh has become taken over from its legitimate. And if you've done any history of the keffiyeh, you know that it was sort of a working class symbol used by the common people, the working class, the people who were in the deserts, who would pull it up over their faces to protect themselves from sandstorms and sun, a nice head covering for the worker. Now it is what I would call, dare I use this? Yeah, you heard me say it on the Jim and Terry show, a woke left. What? Yeah, when people who have nothing to do with this ideology will take this symbol, and how this symbol, which was a working class symbol became co-opted and used for a militant movement, which became Yasser Arafat's PLO, and now is used to show solidarity with a free Gaza, free Palestine? But what does that mean? What does that mean when you say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free? That means exclude all Jews, and it's an anti-Semitic. Yeah, the ADL has made that message pretty clear. It is anti-Semitic, and in its origins, it is also genocidal. That means there is no place in the concept of Palestine in the Arab mind for a peaceful coexistence with Jews and the state of Israel. And so they are mutually exclusive ideas. Can there be a political solution in which people, rational people, believe that it is possible to coexist? It's hard to exist when someone wants to take over your space. And that includes ideas that we need to discuss of selling land to the Israeli settlers, nationalizing land. And so we have to say, to what extent is Israel taking over space that should be Palestinian? Or look at the other argument, to what extent is Palestine responsible for the militancy, the taking over, the attacking? Not taking over, attacking. It's one thing to be displaced, and we have lots of examples in history of displaced persons, but we don't have a lot of examples of the militant ousting, where people are taken out by gunpoint and removed. It's going on in Ukraine now. It is going on probably to some extent that we don't know and cannot measure, because we cannot trust Hamas to provide details and statistics. We're told 30 to 40,000 people, most of them are women and children, being killed so far. And yet, what is the evidence of this? And who is doing the body counts? And for that, I recall the early days of Israel's counterattack, and the hospital, the first hospital to be attacked, was by a Hamas missile, not an Israeli one. The body count was totally 10 times beyond what was actually the death toll. Who do you trust? It comes down to your sources. Who are you going to believe? And can you do enough research to make the sources credible in your own mind? Who are you going to believe? Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? Jim and Terry Show signing off. Cultural appropriation, symbols of peace, working class becoming seconded to ideologies of hate. Bye-bye for now.